Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I'd like to kick off by paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land and paying my respects to the elders past and present and other elders who may be present with us today. Also appreciate the introduction. Last time I subbed for Jill, I didn't get an introduction, and I merrily, this was in Sydney, was called Gil for the afternoon. So people were polite enough to not point out to me that I had a lady's name. And I was polite enough not to correct them that my name was Simon. So Simon it is, and I'm glad to be here in the first person. This is a subject that I know that Jill Callister and my organisation is deeply passionate about. Obviously young people are a core part of our work, and not just through the traditional DHS services. When you think about DHS, you often think about services like child protection and youth justice in any young person's context, but since we've inherited the Office for Youth, it's really helped us expand our horizons in the thinking about young people. And I think it's fair to say it's been a major driver in our service delivery reform effort as we're exposed to a whole lot of different ideas about more universal approaches to young people, and exposed to a lot, I think it's fair to say, of inspiration that's happening across work with young people in general, rather than sort of our traditional program silos. So the topic of this morning's session is integrated services, and as per the introduction, it's something that takes up a lot of my life at the moment. It's something I'm deeply passionate about and interested in. We at DHS, I think it's fair to say, have been criticised fairly heavily in the past for a lot of service delivery issues and a lot of issues with clients. But when you get in and you actually work in the organisation, you come to appreciate the passion and expertise that exists in our 11,000 staff. And also the passion and expertise that exists in our partner organisations, and we have around 990 partner organisations delivering services as varied as homelessness services, disability services, family services, so on and so forth. In total, our organisation operates off the base of about $3.5 billion, and we think makes a really valuable contribution to the Victorian society and the Victorian economy. And I want to talk to you today a bit about how we're starting to integrate our services and how it's something that's occupying our minds at the moment. I also want to touch very quickly, mindful of the fact that Bill Scales is speaking this afternoon on the Victorian Vulnerable Children Inquiry and government's response. And that's another area we're obviously very motivated to make things better, but equally taking our cues from the core principles of service integration. Okay, so today's presentation is themed with the phrase, "Is there anything else I can help you with?" It's a phrase that most of you will be familiar with if you interact with retail or banking or any kind of service industry out there. The economic motivation of business is to extract as much possible value out of customers as possible. So the phrase, "anything else I can help you with," is something that's very relevant in that field, but we think it's equally relevant to us. We think is there anything I can help you with today, it is a phrase that probably should and needs to find its way into the delivery of human services and delivery of services to marginalised people as we go forward. And that's the essence of today's presentation. I'll hopefully challenge some of the views that putting this question to our clients will simply blow the budget, or will mean that we'll kind of, wallow and linger with people in vulnerability and disadvantage for longer while we dream up new ways of providing additional costly services. We think that truth couldn't be further from the. We think that couldn't be further from the truth, and we think that by asking these type of simple questions and engaging with people around their whole issue and their whole issues of vulnerability, and asking questions like, "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" will lead to much better outcomes for our client group in a much more cost-effective way. For us, the imperative isn't economic. The imperative isn't taking more money from customers. It isn't extracting greater value from our transactions in an economic sense. The imperative for us is to deliver better life outcomes for our clients. The imperative is delivering a good life. To paraphrase Nobel Prize-winning economist Amartya Sen, a good life is one that young people have a reason to value. The dimensions of that, for us, are personal, social and economic. Here's another area where GHS is moving away from its traditional base. Traditionally, we've been very much a personal organisation. It's something we're good at and a real strength that we have. We've taken our cues from community sector organisations who have treated disadvantage not just through the personal lens, and this is something we're getting involved in a pretty heavy way. This is to say, and if you look at the Australian Social Inclusion Board indicators of disadvantage, and you work through the different metrics and the different proxy indicators for disadvantage, they don't just sit in the personal domain. They're about community engagement and economic participation as well. It's not to say that everyone has the same starting point. Absolutely, reality couldn't be further from the truth. And it's not that everyone has the same destination. Again, follow to think that that's the case. This is simply about us saying that when we're presented with a person, when we're presented with a family, when we're presented with a young person who's experiencing vulnerability or disadvantage, we need to, in all of our transactions, all of our service deliveries, all of our assistance and supports, to be conscious, constantly thinking about how we can help these individuals in their personal, community and economic domains of disadvantage. One of the most alarming statistics I've seen in the last 12 months came out of a recent HILDA survey. For those of you who aren't familiar with HILDA, it's a great data set that gives you a longitudinal appreciation of households and outcomes. And the alarming study there for me was the amount of people who are escaping poverty, and I'll use poverty for a moment as a proxy for disadvantage, but disadvantage can take many forms. The amount of people who are escaping poverty in one survey, only a couple of years later to come straight back. And that does not make good sense for us. It's not delivering good life outcomes. It's not good economically to continue to keep recycling through the same old clients. And bottom line, it's a really bloody bad outcome for those clients who keep coming back. So we know from history, you will know, I'm sure, I'm preaching to the converted here, that the only way we can ensure we help people out of our systems, out of disadvantage, out of vulnerability, and into sustainable, long-term, better life outcomes is by assisting them on those three fronts: personal, community and economic. If you look at the last 10 years in Victoria, we've had pretty stunning economic growth. Our economic conditions are the envy of the world, I reckon, and things are pretty tough today. You may have read recently that my organisation is losing 500 staff over the next 12 to 18 months. Things are pretty tough, right? But we're still the envy, I reckon, of the developed world economically. We've been really blessed and fortunate over the last 10 years to experience great prosperity and growth. However, we all know in this room that we haven't seen much change in vulnerable cohorts. Actually, alarmingly, what we've seen is an increase in vulnerability. Our notifications for child protection are going through the roof. Our demand for our youth justice services are increasing. Demand for acquired disability services increasing. Demand for housing and homelessness services increasing. How is this the case when we're supposedly all much better off and the gross state product is increasing at such a rapid rate? Again, preaching is the converted, but the case is a lot of people are missing out and they're being left behind. And as we turn into possibly a downward cycle of economic growth, these are the people who are going to feel it first and feel it hardest. So if we're ever going to be motivated to get things right for this cohort, now's the time. I'm not saying we've taken our eye off the ball as prosperity's been increasing in GSP, gross state product's been increasing, but I reckon today is a good opportunity, this period's a good opportunity when people are actually starting to think about downturns, are actually thinking about structural job losses, are actually thinking about increasing disadvantage in a more traditional sense, that we can get on and make some changes for good. There's a growing momentum of thinking that traditional services are service delivery goals of efficiency and cost minimisation. So we hear it a lot. Important as they are, they won't change much for vulnerable people. However, if we can't meet those ends, we'll be out of business. So I'm about to get into the integration agenda for DHS, and I'll do so in the pursuit of addressing the personal, economic and community goals, but also do so confronting the dual goals for us as an agency of achieving maximum productivity while delivering better life outcomes. It's actually the other way around, but don't tell Treasury that. Recent research in the field of positive psychology holds that the answer to what makes a good life for people is threefold: self-acceptance, positive personal relationships, and a sense of meaning and purpose in life. Question for us is, how do we achieve these goals? how do we make sure that self-acceptance, positive personal relationships and a sense of meaning and purpose in life actually increases for people who present to us in our server systems? It's pretty hard to purchase outputs and widgets that deliver against those. You know, I'd like to purchase a service that increases someone's self-acceptance. That's quite a foreign concept for us as government. We purchase services like houses and supports and things that we can neatly measure and define. Yet contemporary research tells us that the ball game's quite different to that. So the challenge for us in talking the rhetoric of integration is to actually walk the walk, to give our partner organisations and our own staff the flexibility to strive towards these type of outcomes and these differences in people's lives. Straight to this one. Mission Australia's most recent survey of Australia's young people does a great job of identifying the aspirations and concerns of many. 38% of Victorian young people said that coping with stress is a major concern for them, and this was the highest nationally. It's a bit of a wake-up call for us, this survey, actually. School and study problems and body image are major concerns too. 1 in 5 respondents said that family conflict, bullying, emotional abuse and personal safety are concerns for them. 1 in 5. 20%. Importantly, 75% of young people valued family relationships. The leading sources of advice and support for young people are parents, friends, relatives and family friends. I guess we could have guessed that one. What the survey shows is that all young people are vulnerable at some point. I think this is a really interesting point and one I want to touch on. The majority won't slip through the safety net of family, friends, teachers and other supports, but some will. And 1 in 5 kids surveyed said that if they did not have somewhere to go, for support and advice. These kids often find their way to us in the Department of Human Services. And our concern is that if these kids come through to us, by the time they get to us, it's a really hard road back. And if we're talking numbers like 1 in 5, pretty alarming, right? On the positive side, and this is a different piece of research I want to introduce, and this one isn't peer-reviewed. This one is something that I think makes intuitive sense, and I'm hoping it finds its way into mainstream literature, is about resilience of these 1 in 5. Traditionally, we've viewed these 1 in 5 as having a lack of resilience, as being vulnerable, being in a special category that needs a great deal of support and protection and security so that they can, kind of step up and be part of the universal systems, be part of mainstream life. What this research did was to actually challenge that and talk about what vulnerability actually does mean in young people. And interestingly enough, it put it like this, that vulnerability is a sign of potential excellence or a sign of disengagement. And if you think about the population crudely as a 20-60-20 type arrangement, those who display strong resilience in their junior to middle years will often end up in that middle 60%. Those who are deemed vulnerable when they're young, it actually shows they also demonstrate great creativity and potential for ideas, hard work and community engagement, and often populate the top 20% going forward, but often populate the bottom 20% as well going forward in terms of outcomes. The central tenet of the argument is that vulnerability doesn't need to be seen as a major weight around somebody's neck. It actually can be a sign of great potential. And this is what brings people to work in DHS on a daily basis, to protect and make sure that people who are destined for the bottom 20% of life outcomes in our society are brought up and protected. But also this idea that vulnerability and presentation to DHS actually can be a sign that within these young people exists great potential. And it's our job to tap that, to help them get into sort of mainstream life and to help them thrive and realise their absolute true potential, which, as I said, can place them in the top couple of % of population in terms of life outcome and contribution. It's a fabulous piece of research and one that I find motivating and inspiring. Conventional wisdom is that unemployment... actually, I might skip through that. The point here, and the point I want to make here is back to my economic point earlier. We're about to experience a downturn. You're seeing in all the economic numbers now. Things are about to get tougher. We, at the vulnerable end of government business, if you like, are counter-cyclical. When times are good, our job's really hard. When times are economically bad, our job is really bloody hard. None of us operate in this room that I'm aware of, although, colleagues in schools perhaps a bit different, but none of us operate with demand-driven budgets. I was having a conversation with some colleagues from the Federal Department of Human Services the other day from the welfare side. So you think about Centrelink payments and the like. Their business is demand-driven. If somebody's unemployed, we make welfare payments to them and the machine clicks over one more, one more lot of welfare payments goes in the bank account for federal DHS to pass on. Our business, and I dare say most people in this room's business, is quite different. We have a fixed budget, and as demand goes up, we have a fixed budget. So facing the counter cycles of the economy means that things are about to get tough for us, and tougher for us, and we need to get more creative in how we deal with these. Lucas Walsh from Murdoch University Centre for Everyday Life has described youth unemployment as a further dimension to Australia's two-speed economic divide. We often think of the economic divide simply in terms of geography, where, the rich mining states are kicking on and kicking goals, and the states without natural resources, or at least those that we choose not to dig up en masse, are falling behind. I think this kind of idea of demographic two-speed economy is really relevant, and again, something we all live with on a daily basis. Youth unemployment is a terrific indicator of the health of a nation. And anybody who followed the London riots and has seen some of the youth unemployment figures in Spain and along the Iberian Peninsula would know just the devastation that youth unemployment and youth disengagement can lead to in terms of a sort of global outcomes for communities and nations. We have witnessed the largest increase in youth unemployment in 20 years in Victoria. And to quote Sol Eastlake, from over the last 12 months, younger people continue to miss out. This continues to hit hard in Melbourne, particularly in suburbs like Broadmeadows, Dandenong and Sunshine. The challenge is to support, engage and re-engage this cohort now. Again, contemporary research, historical research shows that the longer people are out of workforce, the longer it's going to take them to get back in. The risk is that these kids pass through life in a population bubble, unemployed for the long term. And I'm going heavy on the research today, and I realise it's morning, and I do apologise for that. But for those who saw one of the most recent Social Inclusion Board reports around jobless families, it's just, if you hadn't seen it before, get a copy of this report, because it describes how profound the impacts of intergenerational disadvantage can be. The instance of jobless families in Australia is alarmingly high, and it's alarmingly high in Victoria. And you think about the challenge of being a young person today without those supports I spoke about earlier, in a jobless household, potentially in a jobless street, starting from a long way back. The Department of Human Services is also concerned with how we get better outcomes for roughly our 55,000 child protection notifications we deal with each year. By the time you get to a child protection notification, guys, things are really tough. We have people in this room who I'm sure would be happy to talk to if you don't know much about the process or how we deal with child protection notifications or substantiations in the state of Victoria. But what I can tell you and what you will understand is that the notifications, that is, people actually taking the trouble to ring up, either reporting mandatorily or actually just ringing up on a voluntary basis to say, hey, I think there's an issue here, is going through the roof. Our substantiation rate, that is to say that the courts, where we actually investigate this and we take it to court and it's substantiated, kind of tracking slightly upward. However, that's a presentation and a whole day discussion in its own right. With over 600 children and young people who are in out-of-home care and the 200 or so in youth justice each day, we're seeing growth in demand from the younger cohorts. These kids make up a good part of the vulnerable cohort of Victoria's youth, but I won't stand up here and profess that they're the entire cohort of Victoria's vulnerable youth. Reaching for better personal, social and economic outcomes with each of these young people makes good sense to the wider economy and society. This theme, again, of economy emerges for me. We are criticised, and I dare say some people in this room criticised as being, too invested in the social end and not attuned to economics. But I tell you what, going into an economic downturn, witnessing the amount of money that's spent on welfare every year, thinking about the life outcomes and life expenses and costs for young people we come into contact with, If we can stop every now and again and ask, is there anything else I can do for you? Is there any other way I can help you in any domain of disadvantage? If we can succeed there, I tell you what, we're going to save a whole lot of money, and we're going to be one of the major economic contributors and drivers and financial drivers of the state and the nation going forward. So I, for one, refuse to accept the fact that we're not major economic contributors, and I equally refuse to accept the fact that we're an expense or a drain on state finances, but rather a major source of insulation and contribution. So I'll skip on to using a wider lens and talk you a bit through the Case for Change document that we spoke about recently, that we released recently. We know from recent research at the University of Chicago on personality psychology and economics that a person's character is a critical determinant of education, labour market and health outcomes. This is really important for services that deal with situations like how a teenager who is in state care can build their skill set necessary to interact well with people in a workplace, for example, to get along with others, to behave in a conscientious way, to hold down a job, to be a stable or a tenant in private accommodation. These soft skills aren't nice to haves, they're criticals. If you want to talk about how critical these soft skills are, can think about them like this. They're the major determinant for whether or not a young person will end up in jail in the US system. So, if you grab 10 people on the street and ask them what is a determinant, or what's sort of the predictive features for somebody ending up in jail in the US, I don't reckon they'd talk to you about those softer skills. I reckon they'd talk to you about demographics and socioeconomics. The fact is, when it comes down to it, the research says that those demographics, the ability to get along with others and behave in a conscientious way, tying back to those skills I spoke about earlier, they're the things that make a difference and contribute to somebody. They're the things that we can't readily and easily purchase against. They're the things that require the asking of the question, is there anything else I can help you with? Another recent report from the Young Foundation in the UK compiles a wealth of evidence for holistic service approaches that build the social and emotional capabilities for young people. The evidence is that these approaches tend to have greater long-term benefits for people compared to the ones that have single problem, that address single problem or symptoms. And here we go with the integration theme. Traditionally, we've delivered silo-based services. It's fair to say government drives that kind of behaviour from time to time with the way it purchases services, and we certainly organise along professional boundaries or in professional silos, or defined by bureaucratic portfolios or bureaucratic boundaries or ministerial responsibilities. I can tell you, and you already know this, that disadvantage and vulnerability never sits neatly within inside a professional boundary. It never sits neatly within inside a bureaucratic boundary, or if you want to, go back and read the budget papers, it never quite sits neatly within one of the output groups defined in Budget Paper 3. So our whole system, if you like, is geared towards delivering these siloed-based services, and I've just spoken at a bit of length about how we've got to deliver more holistic kind of, soft skill-based services that help build capabilities around the whole individual or the family unit. How we break from this silo-based system and move to a more holistic client-based system, while keeping our eyes on the important thing, while making sure young people are safe and secure, while making sure they're living within the law and the bounds of good community, is the challenge, and something we think we've made a start on in DHS, and that I'll focus on for the last part of my presentation. The document on screen at the moment, the Case for Change, was released by our ministers for housing and community building and community services, women's affairs and mental health late last year. And this is another document that I'll refer you to have a look at if you haven't seen it before. I think this is a really big step forward for government. We refer to it as the Orange Book, and I see lots of orange in the audience now, so I'll take that as a positive sign. The Orange Book is a vision for our vision for client-centred, client outcomes-focused services delivered in a financially sustainable way. It confronts everything we think we do badly. Now, I think this is a shift. We've been around this block before. We've been pursuing integrated services for many years. One of my favourite stories at the moment is of a document I found about 6 months ago. It's a story of when Victorian state government first evolved. In the early days, over 150 years ago, Victorian state government had 150 public servants. And a report was commissioned to how well government was travelling, and that report damned these 150 public servants for being fragmented and siloed. Today we've got 30,000 plus, and I don't reckon we made much ground then, and the Ombudsman and the Auditor General agrees. So the challenge is really hard in a Westminster system of government to overcome silo-based services, but this document, I think, addresses that and talks in some detail, not a great deal, but some detail about how we're actually going to start walking the talk in DHS. The document examines how the current system limits the connections for our clients to build capabilities across programs. And importantly, the document is also based on how we can build on the strengths of our existing system. We can't walk away from our strengths while addressing the weaknesses, obviously, because some amazing things happen and some terrific outcomes are achieved. And it sets a direction for how we can change to make long-term lasting differences in the lives of young people and older Victorians. The case for change is founded on 5 principles. Principle 1, clients and their outcomes have primacy within the system and are the principal drivers for human service activities. Sounds really silly and obvious, doesn't it? Everyone in this room, I'm sure, everyone who's ever been trained in the field of social work or psychology or youth engagement or anything like that will come because they have a passion for delivering outcomes. Lord knows not for the money. We'll get trained to deliver outcomes. Lord knows not siloed-based services. We'll show up to work on day one motivated, engaged by an organisation that exists to deliver better outcomes, has a mission to deliver better outcomes, and then has a whole lot of output-based funding brought down upon it to fragment and deliver siloed-based services within either professional or sort of bureaucratically defined processes. So I kind of read this stuff and I read the orange book that colleagues and I wrote and think, well, it kind of sounds like a no-brainer. The tragedy is that it's not. It's not a no-brainer. And once again, I'm pretty happy that we've confronted it on paper here and really set the challenge for government and the challenge for our partners in how we actually break down that tradition that we've built over the last 150 years, how we actually take this quantum leap from what we're all here to do and want to do to building a whole lot of enablers in terms of finance, in terms of accountability, in terms of governance to make sure we can actually do that. Principle 2, services should be effective for clients and be provided in a cost-effective way. 3, that all parts of the human service system should work together by aligning objectives and integrating service delivery. Hard, again. There's no single organisation out there that I'm aware of that can deal with the clients facing greatest complexity. This means working in new partnerships, sharing information in more creative ways, building up connections around case planning and connections around executions against case plans so that individuals tell their story once, build trust and confidence in an ongoing way, and are given the supports and incentives that are all leading towards shared and co-produced outcomes and service delivery. 4, that human service workforce is the foundation for effective service delivery. Hard again. We in DHS alone will be looking at recruiting around 13 to 15,000 additional people in the next 10 to 15 years. We only have an 11,000 person organisation. That speaks to the kind of turnover we're expecting. The aged care sector in itself will consume an additional 11,000 people in the next 5 years. We know this because they're driven by demographics. And that's in the context of the new federal funding. If NDIS comes on stream, we know, we hope, that demand for labour will increase again. It's going to be hard to recruit the critical mass we need. So we're clearly going to have to work differently as well as doing more to attract people to our sector. And 5, clients will be valued, respected and treated fairly at all times. The case for change is available on the DHS website, and I reckon it's a non-traditional government publication that I encourage everyone to have a look at. I'll move on very quickly to how we're walking the talk in DHS, and I reckon I'll see a lot of head nodding because I reckon we've taken our cues a lot from the sector in how we're pursuing this agenda. A few years ago, Steve Jobs was interviewed by ABC America on some groundbreaking new gadget. It's how tech savvy I am. Groundbreaking new gadget. I probably should figure out what that is at some stage and actually name it. I possibly own one and can't use it. We've gone through the operating system and looked at absolutely everything you said, and we've asked ourselves how we can simplify this and make it more powerful at the same time. I love that quote, and I know Jill does. How how we can simplify this and make it more powerful at the same time. Simplify and more powerful. You think about clients interacting with our services in our system, and I reckon they'd dearly love it if we simplified things. I reckon families who have multiple family members engaging with our system would dearly love it if we simplified things. We need to do this while making things more powerful at the same time, and that's what's driving us at DHS in our integration agenda. That's a thrust of how we're now comprehensively transforming DHS, and we hope we're creating a simpler, more efficient, more effective organisations where the clients are at the centre of everything we do. During the last 12 months, the department has undertaken a comprehensive review of how it's organised. And in terms of structure, in terms of how we do business, in terms of how decisions get made, and at the end of the day, most importantly, in terms of how clients benefit or otherwise from our intervention. On screen is some of the critical elements of our structure. You may have heard that we're restructuring DHS. 2 minutes on how we're doing it. We're going more local, so we're getting closer to the ground. We feel like we want to move from program and problem to person and place. That's another mantra internally. We're moving to far more targeted, far more local service delivery entities within DHS. Not to say we're fragmenting, not to say we're creating these little corporate structures everywhere, just to say that service delivery we want to be far closer to the ground, and we want holistic service delivery to be far closer to the ground. Anyone who's familiar with our organisation, if you've ever looked through our organisation structure, not saying you should, but if you have to go really high up in the organisation before you find someone who's taken a whole of department, whole of portfolio view. And if you think about our clients, you need to go even higher. You probably need to go to Mary Wooldridge, our Minister, because Minister Wooldridge has coverage for alcohol and other drugs and mental health. So if you want to talk about vulnerable young people coming into our care, to go up to somebody who has a holistic or at least a pretty comprehensive view of the young person, you have to go right up the top of the chain. What we want to do is push that view as far down locally as possible before we go into our really important and really required specialisations on the ground. We want that whole of client view to be pushed down as low as possible, and hence the local area thrust. Integration, I've already spoken at length about our desire to engage people in the services they receive in a co-production sense, but also addressing community and economic domains of disadvantage. Aligning better to demand. Most of you know here in Victoria we have two of the most significant growth corridors in Australia at the moment. And if you want to talk about demand for services, you need to look no further than Casey and Cardinia for us, or if you want to go out west, go out towards Melton and Co. And if you look at the new lease of land, these growth corridors are having a profound effect on the demand for human services in Victoria. And if you look on the ground, the other thing you'll notice is the significant lack of service delivery infrastructure, both in a community service organisation sense and in a government sense. So we want to organise more around sort of contemporary population movements. Want to engage more rural Victoria and, as I said, push local decision making down a bit further as well. That's the structural side. On the service delivery side, we're pursuing a holistic service delivery model called Services Connect. Services Connect is a model of service delivery that we see as a future platform for how human services delivers or partners with community service organisations to deliver services. And this is as much defined by good information sharing and holistic case planning as it is by kind of workforce and industrial structures. But I had intended to go into Service Connect a little bit more detail, but in the interest of time I won't. But I'll leave it out there that services, the structure, interesting, but for me, not deadly important. It's more of a precondition for how we more integrate. The idea of Services Connect and how Services Connect is a new service delivery model, replacing traditional silo-based service delivery model, will have a far more profound impact on clients into the future than any kind of structural tweaks we'll make. Services Connect is also our vision for how we engage with sector organisations and the market that works with vulnerable young people, because once again, disadvantage and vulnerability doesn't find its way neatly into DHS services or CSO services. It more often than not spans the boundaries of multiple organisations. So when we talk about connected service delivery, it's about connecting across the board. The Victorian Vulnerable Children Inquiry. As I said, you'll be hearing from Bill Scales later on, who'll do this far more justice than I will. and interestingly, Bill was one of my early bosses, so I'll certainly not attempt to steal any of his thunder. Though the title indicates that protecting vulnerable children inquiry is concerned specifically with how Victoria will go about protecting its most vulnerable children and young people, the final report of the inquiry contains some 90 fairly wide-ranging recommendations. Contains 20 findings and 14 matters for attentions. And to quote the report, the inquiry recommends extensive and far-reaching changes to Victoria's current system for protecting children. And as I said earlier, Bill Scales AO, a member of the inquiry panel, will speak to you later this morning or this afternoon. I won't go into much more detail there. I will, however, wrap up. I want to conclude my remarks with another idea that ties us back to the themes of integration, connecting to the social, economic and community domains of disadvantage, and to the central theme of this morning's discussion around, as I said, integration. I'll conclude with my remarks with the idea that people need future to shape the present. This is especially powerful for young people. Jeff Mulgan, the head of the Young Foundation in the UK, observed that one of the effects of the Great Collapse, by this I mean the Great Economic Collapse, has been that people's horizons shrink. For those hit hardest, they travel less, they get out less, they hope less, he wrote in a blog entry. And once again, you need look no further than the most recent London experience when you're thinking through this idea. People doing it tough, he said, find it harder to plan ahead and even imagine where they might be in a few years' time. One of the biggest differences between families that thrive and ones that fall apart is that thriving ones have shared sense of future and one they might be doing together to get there. Having a future, it seems, gives us hope and gives us a positive foundation for shape, meaning and purpose to our lives. But it's not automatic. It requires energy, effort and nurturing. And as Mulgan questions, maybe the present or the absence of future is now one of the most important inequalities. You think about, again, moving away from traditional views of disadvantage about socioeconomics or demographics, this view of the presence or the absence of future is something that I think we all need to think about. Putting young people at the centre of everything we do and helping them see a better future will shift the shares between those groups that see and do not see a future. In DHS, we think we're making a start. I haven't done what we're doing in DHS or with our partners by any stroke of justice this morning in my quick presentation, but I do want to give people a flavour of the kind of directions we're heading in, which, you know, to summarise all the stuff I've discussed this morning, stats, research and ideas and alike, summarised by saying it's about breaking down the silos and working around people. It's about forgetting traditional boundaries. It's about being really accountable and sustainable in the way we interact with clients, but it's about challenging the norms. It's about challenging professional boundaries, professional fragments, and output-based silos to move towards outcome. It's as simple as that. People in this room continue to challenge us to make sure we do it, and in return, we'll continue to challenge you. And at the end of the day, I hope we can deliver better outcomes for young people in the process.